Welcome to True House Stories. I am Lenny Fontana coming out of New York City. New York City, right? The hottest spot in the world, the hottest place for house music at one time, disco and all that. Well, this each and every week we go and look for some of our greats that came out of New York and took the sound around the world. And this man right now, who I'm going to bring up, is no small character. He is a huge force, has done so many things for so many people. He's broken records. He's helped make a lot of careers happen. It's incredible the things that he has been involved in. He started from college level radio, took that sound around the world, played it more places than I can name, and every continent has hosted him. Okay? He has a great name. Those that know his name, it goes by one name. Okay, I'm going to say the name in a second. And also, as well, he has a fantastic record label. He's been involved with some great records. He's had some humongous hits, all the great stuff. And he's still, to this day, still giving and still pushing the house sound because he loves it to death, like we all do. He loves house music, loves it, loves it, loves it. I want to welcome to the show no other than DJ Disciple. Yo, Disciple, what's up, brother?
How are you,
baby? Welcome.
Welcome for having me on today. And I want to say hello to everybody from the UK and around the world. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome, brother. First of all, before we even get to first question, I've been asking everybody, how you holding up with?
Well, I've been doing really good in a bad time. I play the drums in my church, and a lot of times I've been playing for a lot of funerals of people have been passing away. So I've been doing my part to contribute to people who have been suffering through the virus. And so there was a lot of death within my community. And I was able to put together video legacy montages for them to make sure that, their family recognize and celebrate them. So I've been doing that. And I'm enjoying being a full-time dad. It's the best thing in the world to partner with the schools, get a stronger bond with my daughter, and be able to do, the remote time that I've been doing. I now am a free man because now she's back in school, but she's been taking the state test and she studied so hard for it. And then in the end, they said, well, it's optional. You don't have to take it. And I was like, what do you mean? So, but I'm grateful to have been going through that with her. And obviously, putting out that I've never put out.
Let me ask you something. We went to school a long time ago. I'm going to ask you as a father now, question. The way they're teaching the kids now, are you able to grasp it? Because they've changed the way things go now. Are you able to follow?
The new math is not, but I think that what I did was, if I didn't know a lot of the things from the new math, you can go on and register. Like I would go to Zuzu Bomb, and they would have online tutoring for my daughter. And then obviously, the family always kept a lot of books around, history books or whatever. So I made sure that she was staying on path with her reading level. The most important thing is the partnerships with the schools. And depending on what schools you go to, I came up from a different era, but she's coming up in an era wherein she can be socially in touch with kids remotely. And sometimes she gets in trouble for it because I'm not really a fan of Roblox and TikTok. And so you got to limit that time and make sure that doesn't, be a distraction, because distraction is the enemy of purpose, as we all know. Right?
Yes.
So that's how that goes.
I know. That's why I asked you, because they changed that math. When I saw my daughter come home with that math book many years ago, I was like, that's not what they taught us. And then you got to answer everything as to why you got that answer. It's like easy. It's 22. Why do I need to tell you why? It's like you got to explain. You got to write it all out. I'm like, oh, God.
But I'm grateful for the bond and the experience. And it's something that she'll never forget because we didn't go a lot of places. Right? And the only thing that's at fault here is that I did not socially distance from the refrigerator, which is why you have me shot up from the chest up. And this is the reason why I'm not showing my whole body. You're not going to see a full screen at DJ Disciple today. I'm still working on the little, I was a little pregnant for a little while, but I'm popular.
Wait a second. Wait a second. Will Smith did a fabulous photo with his shedded body. He showed his stomach, Will Smith. He said, I've been working to that refrigerator. He looks heavy.
Gotta get away. I got a social distance from the fridge, bro. Anyway.
Did you put a lock on it? Okay.
Couple because the Knicks are hot right now.
I know.
The Knicks games, start reaching for the popcorn and you gotta reach for that, I got my little water bottle.
Hurry sick. Reach for the popcorn. Go get your popcorn, go get your wine, go get your beer, because this story's gonna get real in a second. You better hurry up and get it. Go get it while we're having our middle talk, because when he gets rolling, you're not gonna be ready for what's coming. I got a show and tell today. It's unreal. All right, disciple. Let's go to the pictures and get you ready. Here we go. First, as I always ask everyone, the same thing is, let's start right from the tippity bottom. We'll work our way to the top. All right, from Jump Street. When you were a young kid, how does music find you?
I was born to it because it was 5 brothers, right? 5 of us: Sherman, Stanley, Larry, Leighton, and then I was born. And so my father, William Banks, invested into music for us because he didn't get to realize his own dream. And he married my mom. And at the time, we were living, when he had moved to Farragut Projects, which is Farragut Housing. It's located it's located in the east of the Brooklyn Heights, in the west of Fort Greene, south of, that area called down under the Manhattan Bridge. We know that down under the Manhattan Bridge overpass, we know there's Dumbo. So the housing project was completed in 1951 when he moved in. And at that time, the rent was only like $8 a month, right? So musically, I think that Stanley had the first success because when I was coming up at 2 years old, and you could see photos of, me as a baby, he had already been in the New York High School Orchestra and the chorus, like the Philharmonic Hall. And it was a big deal back then. And not to be outdoed, my other brother, because it was always Stanley and Larry that was really deeply entrenched. Larry, he would go to Dr. White Community Center, which is a center across the street, and he would get into James Brown split contests. They would have a contest with splits. And so at a very young age, Stanley would get together with Steve Standard. People know him today as Strafe, the guy that made Set It Off. So his father, Stevie's father, had a group called Mr. Stevie and the Young Ones. And so Strafe and like Stevie and Rodney Newell would play guitar, and Stanley would play the bass, and Steve Gordon would play the drums. And they would play in front of the buildings. Now buildings were 234, 177, 202, 190, and 192. And so Stanley would play like all of the Brooklyn bar scenes. And he had really gotten hot what he was doing. At that time, he was playing also football. He would play outside games in Farragut. And one of the people that he was playing games with was Grandmaster Flowers, Jonathan Flowers. At the time, the Flowers family lived on the same floor as my family on the 10th floor, but we moved downstairs. And Larry wasn't a fan of Jonathan Flowers because when Larry was 8 years old, Flowers dropped him on his head. So he never really forgave him for that. And he was really upset about it. But Grandmaster Flowers was the first experience of the mobile DJ, right? And so he got known doing the Reese Beach events, doing the Eastern Parkway Caribbean Parade. And Flowers, Grandmaster Flowers, he was known as Flowers and Dice originally for graffiti, but he laid the important groundwork for the mobile DJ movement. He was a mobile DJ pioneer, right? And so you got this DJ stuff coming out. And that group of DJs was like Flowers, Maboya, Plummer, Pete DJ Jones. And he was a pre-discotheque dance hall DJ before disco was a real thing. Okay? So they would do events like at the Zoo on Atlantic and Nostrand. You had like different crews like the Infinity Machine, Charisma Sounds, the Disco Twins, you had Stevie D, and so a lot of these events was promoted by, M. Morton Hall, right? You would go to Club Mahogany, they would do these events. You can even see it online now, like back in 1975, Elmo the Magic Christian did a party at the Hotel St. George, which was in Dumbo, which wasn't so far from me, back in 1975. And he had back then BT Express, the Joneses, all these different people. Most of the time, a lot of people from Farragut, and then you had a community next to me called Fort Greene, Bed-Stuy, they would all come down to this place called COCP, Community Organization Central Party. I think it's called Party. But he would do those venues and Club Ibadan, which was 243. And the way his system was set up, he would have like Thorn turntables, right? And so, people back then, they were like into like Jimmy Castor and the Bunch, Cy May, Mandrill, 8 High, and Ohio Players, right? And so, the Flowers family and our family really, really got along, and we were connected. And then obviously with Strafe, my mother was a fan of Strafe because, he was inspired by Flowers, but he also was a DJ. He DJ'd at like Shady Rest Park, which is a park across the street from me, or 111 Park. And so after that, we have Kenny Carpenter. Now, Kenny Carpenter knew me when I was in draws, okay? He knew me when I was a little baby. And he came up with my brother Larry, you know what I'm saying? So me, him, Kenny Carpenter, and then you had Rusty Taylor with the Taylor family. These were all family people that was community, but they were also involved in the family. Now, as a side note, my oldest brother, Shimon, he was into music early, but he got out of it and he got into construction work. And in the construction field at that time in the 1970s, he had to protest. He had to get part of a coalition that was fighting for the rights for Blacks and Latinos to get construction work. And so, really? Yeah, he was part of a construction.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Black economic survival. And so he was doing that, and he became the first civil rights leader in our family, Sherman Banks. He was responsible for helping Blacks.
Google that. Google Sherman Banks. Sure, Google him up. Check that out. Google him out.
So what wound up happening is he was working with Black economic survival, or fight back, as they would say, because what happened was when you're in the construction field, and he got unionized shortly after. When you're unionized, you can still get fired early, but because he was part of coalition, they couldn't fire him that early. So he was like a leader in that. And so meanwhile, Stanley, in 1971, he gets to play with Eddie Cleanhead Vision back in 1971, right? And so he's deep into his craft, Stanley is. And I'm like 5, 6 years old. But like in 1973, Pee Wee Ellis, the guy that wrote James Brown, I'm Black and I'm Proud, and Cold Sweat, he was doing auditions at Cafe Y. And we know that Cafe Y in Manhattan was owned by Richie Havens, right? And so that saxophonist, Pee Wee Ellis, he's holding audition. And Stanley makes the audition to perform and work with Esther Phillips. So our family get intertwined into music. My brother Leighton, who was just like slightly over me, he gets into church. And my mom does not like him getting involved in church because she did not like us going to church. She did not like it. And so you had that. And then Larry playing in bands. I think Lenny D said back in the days, there was they had like a lot of band showcases. But with Rusty Taylor and Larry, they always had rivalries back in the day. So you had Landscape that was DJ orientated, and then you had the band that was more focused on music. And so what winds up happening is in 1976, we start seeing a lot of musicians coming through because Stanley knows a lot of musicians and Larry knows a lot of musicians. So that's the first time I get to meet Jocelyn Brown, because Jocelyn Brown is tight with Stanley, and you know she's cool with my mom. She calls my mom, she talks to my mom, and so forth. There's a disco group called, at that time in 1976, called Ecstasy, Passion, and Pain, and Barbara Roy was a singer. And so, you know, we're touch and go, and asked me, he went on tour as a bassist because Larry loved playing bass like Stanley, right? So he goes on tour, but not every bass player that plays on tour, gets to do the album or gets to do the recording. Stanley, after working with Esther Phillips, he is working with Stevie Wonder's percussionist, right? And through that percussionist, he gets up and he winds up working with George Benson from Warner Brothers Records. And so Stanley records with George the Breeze album, which had songs like This Masquerade in 1976. And it wasn't the typical kind of jazz that George Benson was making, right? George Benson was like the face of jazz in the 80s, but you know, this first album was what really set him off, was This Masquerade. And then you had, you know, Breezin' by Jose Feliciano, Affirmation. And so Stanley had won a Grammy Awards. I mean, not Stanley, George had won a Grammy Award for Record of the Year. And to post that in, I got to see Stanley at Carnegie Hall play live for the first time. Seeing him play all of those records, his mother and the family were completely proud. And, you know, me and Larry, we would brag, oh yeah, my brother, he plays for George Benson, you know. And then, you know, a year later, he did the soundtrack for Muhammad Ali with George Benson on The Greatest Love of All. You know, he's doing the in-flight. You know, he's working, and you know, when I go to Carnegie Hall, you know, I'm meeting Harvey Mason, you know, and Harvey Mason is playing, you know, with Stanley on an album. I think in a mason jar and stuff like that. So, you know, then we were all moving in different lanes. What wound up happening is, me as a kid, I was being bused to school, and I was bused to PS 105, and I didn't have the easiest childhood. Because New York at that time was territorial. 1973, early 70s, New York is very, very territorial. You know, you had, you know, to put it in plain terms, you had your Good Times, which is Esther and James and all of them. You had that kind of show in America, and then you had your Fonzie show, right? And so certain communities didn't want you. Like if you was Italian, you was black, they didn't want you to commute. If you was black and you was Italian, there was that whole marginalization, right? And so I had problems because I had to get into squats and fights with cats. So I had to get into fights to the point where, you know, I knocked the kids' tooth out, second grade, I third grade, and I got left back in the fourth grade. By the time I got to the fourth grade, they said, hey, is he crazy? Maybe we need to put him in CRMD. What's going on with this kid right here? Now, my mother, you know, she would come and I would give them spankings. Because, you know, as you know Lenny, and sometimes, in some cases, you know, I think that the butt whipping generation, you know, they worked out a little bit better than the timeout generation. You know what I mean?
I don't think that timeout thing really works that well. I think
it was like, you know, you had some kind of. So my mom was coming all the way to Park Slope from Farragut. I'm getting that butt whipped. You know what I'm saying?
Wait. So you agree with your mother's way of dealing with the problem, the ass whipping as a grown up?
I'm raising a girl, so I can't really, you know, I can't do that. If I had I raised a boy, but there was ways to get around it. You know what I'm saying? And then at that time, my mother got 5 boys. She ain't got no time to be keeping on talking about what you need to do over and over and over again. She got to go upside that head. That's the school she came from, you know? So what wound up happening is my brother Larry, right? He's in Brooklyn College while I'm doing this, and he works with he meets a woman named Hilda Richbone, right? And Hilda Richbone introduces him to a girl named Brenda. So this girl Brenda is also known as Shannon that sang Let the Music Play. and so forth, right? The one that birthed freestyle. And so Hilda, she got with Larry because she was initially doing background with Luther Vandross for showcases at the Essex Hotel on 59th Street. This was like 1976, 1977. And so the three of them performed at the World Trade Center for Sam Jacobs, who was a contractor, right? And so I'm engaged in both of their musical activity, but scholastically, I suffered a little bit. And so what Stanley did was that he put me in the George Cofield Karate School.
Oh, let me go, George. Hang on, baby. Look at that guy, Grandmaster George Cofield.
Right. So when I was in junior high school, it was cool to be rebellious. It was cool not to go to school and, indulge in behavior. I think, it would embarrass the family. But he saw that and he decided, you know what, I need that discipline. And so he took me to the karate school on Bergen Street. And my sensei, George Cofield, he was the founder of Tong Dojo, which was he was one of the first people to introduce karate to America, one of the first Black people to introduce karate to America. And, George was a Hall of Fame World Karate award-winning, guy that he taught the Shotokan style. And so in each class, they had that philosophy, which, it's like, it's not merely for self-defense. It's an art and a sharp mental conditioning, to have the ability to think quickly in a controlled, disciplined manner, And so, you don't feel challenged by your deepest fear, or limitations. Because I needed that because not only was I getting it from, Italian communities that probably didn't want, Black people in their neighborhood, but I was getting it from my own. You had to fight for yourself. If I went to summer camp and I was working as a summer school teacher and I was getting my summer check, if I let somebody steal my check, they wouldn't stop. You had to assert yourself, right? And so through karate, it was like a release. And then, after that, I was able to discover music because my mom, she was all my boys are involved in music. And so she got me involved in the rip side of Streamline as playing drums. And she told the drum teacher at the time, James Doyle, stay hard on him. I want you to stay on him. So I developed music through playing the cymbals, learning the rudiments, mama daddies, the paradiddles. I'm learning the skill of how to play drums. And so my brother Larry, he's into different fields. And I start to follow him around. And so at the same time,
was that you in the band pictures here? Was that
no, that's faculty. That's the time of the Riverside.
Okay.
But it kind of gives you an explanation of what was really, really going on. So at the same time, I'm getting my mental instruction and discipline, but I was also feeling spiritually challenged because my brother Larry, he had joined the Church of the Open Door, which was in the same block as where I live. And, I had gotten challenged because at that time in the late 70s, the 5% Nation was strong in Farragut and Fort Greene projects, right? And so I made a decision to accept Jesus in my life because I would rather live my life believing in God and serving him and find out that I was right than not believe in him and then not serve him and then find out I was wrong. So, from that moment on, I believed in Jesus Christ. I took the Lord as my savior. And, I'm not denying him or any of that. And I understand that I'm not perfect, but I accepted him. So
but before you go further, but was Larry at that point the reverend pastor of the church? Is that
no, what he was the organist. He knew how to write songs and he was singing. So he knew how to play bass, but at the Church of the Open Door, he became more of the organist and he began his vocal skills.
Okay.
Right? So he was building up, and he was a great, amazing writer. He knew how to write songs on the spot. So here we go, 1980, right? And so, Staley's having success. He's out the house now because George Benson puts out that big record, Give Me a Night, right? Yep. And so Staley blows up. He's working with Shaka Khan. He's working with Aretha Franklin. He's working with Freddie Hubbard. Al Jarreau, David Sanborn, Eddie James. He's working with the Transfer, the Manhattan Transfer. He's working with the Temptation, Ashley Simpson.
He's working hard. Working hard.
He's Ozzy Brothers stylist. He's setting the bar high. My big brother's setting the bar real, real high. But Larry goes in his own direction, right? Because he becomes, and I go with him, he becomes a studio bassist and he gets used in various studios. So one of the experiments that he had was he was working with Mystic Merlin. And Mystic Merlin came out with a song called Just Can't Give You Up, Thrills in a Minute, Full Moon. He was working like with those kind of people, right? And so as a singer, he had, I think he replaced Freddie Jackson, who was a hot R&B singer later on, right? And so, Mystic Merlin was known for like incorporating magic acts during their show. And so what wound up happening was Mystic Merlin, they got a call to perform at Madison Square Garden with Michael Jackson. And what wound up happening is that it didn't go down because they didn't want any magic. So that fell apart. But the bass player of the group, his name was Clyde Bullard. And he introduces Larry to Tony Smith, who sang for Funkin' for Jamaica, right? So Tom Brown and Funkin' for Jamaica. So Tony Smith is also a studio singer, right? So now Larry, because Mom, she got her hands full. She's cooking. She's doing all of this. Mom's got her hands full, and Larry starts bringing me to the studios where he's at, right? He was often at like Hourglass Studio, right? And he worked with a drummer, I think Ron Freeman, who played with Roy Ayers. He worked. He was working in the same studio that Fonda Ray came out of. He did Quad Studios, 241 Center. He worked at Sound Lab, the same place as D Train, Wang Chong, Lawrence Street, Chung King Studios, 241 Center Street. He was doing all of that, and then he was playing as a session bass player for a lot of groups. He played on Futura for a song called Feeling Hot. And he worked with Sir Coxsone for Studio One Records on a reggae tip, on a Caribbean tip for Beres Hammond. So the thing I learned about studios is, back during that time there was something called time suckers, right? Lenny, you ever go to the studio and you work with an engineer and they be like, yeah, man, you want some coffee? And they just take their time and, they going through the process.
You mean they're walking in backwards instead of forwards? Everything's
right. They work in it, right? Because they know that it's coming out of company time.
Yeah.
You got to recoup that money that you lost in the studio. This is the games they playing, right? And a lot of times, a lot of artists that played on these instruments, they wasn't credited. They were just studio musicians. They didn't get credit. When your record came out, like say for instance, Loose Joints. To this day, I still don't know who the vocal. I know it's Loose Joints, but who's the vocalist? So those kind of questions, kind of like, okay, who's a singer on some of these songs? Who played the bass? Who played the drums? There was a lot of questions during that time.
Yeah,
and
right.
So I had gotten into like playing percussion and playing full scale drums. And now I graduate from junior high school and I go to FDR, right? So my brother, like Stanley and all of them, they can relate to what I would go through at FDR because, getting chased through the hood. And so at that time, Kenny Carpenter's name was big, right? Because he's playing Bond International, he's playing Studio 54, he's done that, he's legend. And you still have this DJ movement, that's really, really strong. And what I wind up noticing is that the DJ movement starts replacing the band movement, right? So now you don't see bands in the streets anymore playing. Now you see DJs in the street playing, right? And so it's a big, big change, right? And so Larry, he starts making his more of a commitment, writing and doing gospel for gospel. Meanwhile, I'm playing drums at FDR. And so me, Larry, and and a guy that I met at FDR called Leon Atkinson. We record our first live album with Willie Corbett, right, at the Holy Cross Church in Brooklyn. And so it's the first time that I think I'm going to be on the record. I'm hyped, getting ready to get on this record. Yeah, I'm getting my props. I'm going to be like my brother Stanley, right? Nothing doing. The record never came out. I was bad, right? And so during that time, in 83, 84, Shannon's got Cheese blowing up, and then you got Straight blowing up with Set It Off.
Oh, yeah, big time.
So musically, there's things there. And then I get more involved because I want to make more financial contributions, and I become a worker at Dr. White Community Center. And my job is to hire youth, right? I'm trying to hire youth to get a summer job. Come on in, be a student, so forth. And, at that time, this is where we get to the crack, right? So what winds up happening is two things happen, right? There was no drums at the Church of the Open Door. And so there was no way for me to expand on, what I had on my, playing the drums. And so what winds up happening is I go to another church, which is called the Greater Refuge Temple, the Hour of Truth, right? Which is in Harlem, 125th Street, with the great Bishop Bond. And I get saved, I get baptized. And at that time, crack cocaine is
Hold
raised.
on, let me ask you a question. For everybody understands this, that non-religious. What does that mean when you say, I've been saved?
Right, that means that Jesus, I gave my life over to him. That's what that means. That means that I've given my life over to the Lord, right? And so at that time, it was really a beckoning call, especially during the crack era, because what happened was, because I was working at Dr. White, and you can say this is for the welfare babies at that time that didn't have no structure, for a lot of those kids that were my age, the drug trade was a way out, right?
Oh, definitely a way out.
So kids my age were seeing hustlers as role models, right? There was a crack house in every building in Farragut, right? Young men, they go out, sell out their community, they crew up, they go to, there was a popular mall downtown Brooklyn called Albee Square Mall in downtown. They flash the latest jewelry, they got their street gear, they got their Dookie gold chain, becomes like a symbol of hood status. And more.
Don't forget, hang on, let me help you there. Let me help you. What cars were you seeing in the parking lot by the Farragut projects?
What?
Tell people what kind of Benzes, Rolls Royce.
You see all the latest cars, right? And so the Albee Square Mall was like a mecca for hip hop fashion, and it was a place where gangsters would go and congregate, right?
That's right.
And so, the dealers, they had an appeal for like the cash and the women. And so what did crack do? And I don't like to spend any time on this too much, but we know that crack created the biggest housing project, pregnancy boom, right? It destroyed the working class. It shattered families, right? And it had people from rival buildings killing each other, right? The dealers from Farragut would get their dope from Harlem, right? And then you see like lines of people waiting to get their stuff, right? And so the people that were legends at that time, DJs, people in my brother's choir, family, everybody fell, prey to crack. And so at this time, I graduated out of FDR High School, and my dad makes a decision. My dad is making an executive decision, right? My dad never taught me about money in his life, never, right? He says, I want you to be like me. I want you to be an accountant. Because that's what he did. He was an accountant.
All right. So on that note, hang on. Let's have a glass of water. And I want to click on the newsletter. I want to, because it's going to get good now.